While global media, politicians and public attention are still distracted by Donald Trump's populist and post-factual Greenland circus, something far more serious is unfolding quietly in the background. The United States has been assembling a massive military force in and around the Middle East, a build-up that is growing by the day and increasingly points toward a potential strike against Iran's ruling regime. This is not a sideshow. The consequences of such a move would be vastly more significant for the global economy, international security and Europe than anything related to Greenland. That is precisely why we need to take a closer look at Trump's objectives in Iran. Because, as you are about to see, this is where Trump has maneuvered himself into a genuine strategic dilemma, one that could ultimately cost him political power at home. What is happening in Iran is not only about the future of the regime in Tehran. It could reshape global energy markets, destabilize entire regions, and redefine power balances between Washington, Beijing, and Moscow. Over the past nights, the movement of US military assets has become impossible to hide. An unusually large number of American aerial refueling aircraft and heavy C-17 transport planes have been redeployed to Europe and the Middle East, far beyond routine rotations. This coincides with the imminent arrival of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, while F-15E Strike Eagles have already reached Jordan. Additional missile defense systems, including Patriot and THAAD batteries, are reportedly being positioned across the region. All of this signals that the countdown toward a possible confrontation with Iran is accelerating. A strike, or even the credible threat of one, would have enormous consequences. A collapse or forced transformation of Iran, a key pillar in the Beijing-Moscow-Tehran axis, would represent one of the most significant geopolitical shifts since the end of the Soviet Union. Oil prices could surge dramatically if Iran attempted to block the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a quarter of the world's oil shipments pass. Alternatively, targeted strikes on Iranian or even Saudi oil infrastructure could shock global markets and push the world economy toward recession. But there is another scenario that is just as disruptive. If sanctions were lifted following a regime change or a political deal, oil prices could collapse, potentially falling below $30 per barrel. Such a price crash would devastate oil-dependent economies, especially Russia, but it would also have far-reaching consequences for China, the Gulf states, and even Trump's own political base in the US energy sector. Iran currently holds what can only be described as a floating oil time bomb. Roughly 160 million barrels of ultralight crude stored on tankers, unable to reach the market due to sanctions. That amount equals about 40% of the entire US strategic petroleum reserve. If sanctions were lifted, this oil would flood global markets almost immediately, followed by millions of additional barrels per day from Iran's dormant production capacity. Trump understands this leverage very well. In a best-case scenario for him, he would not seek a full regime change, but rather aim to position the United States and himself as the gatekeeper of Iranian oil exports, similar to his approach in Venezuela. Control the sanctions, control the flow of oil, and suddenly you control a major valve of the global economy. However, believing that this military build-up automatically means a full-scale war would be a mistake. The political constraints Trump faces in Washington are severe. The 2026 midterm elections are approaching, and history is not on his side. Republicans currently hold only razor-thin majorities, and losing control of Congress would effectively cripple Trump's ability to govern. An impeachment process would suddenly become a real threat. Trump's political survival depends heavily on two things: keeping inflation under control and avoiding oil price shocks. A prolonged or chaotic war in the Gulf would risk both. At the same time, a sudden oil glut caused by Iranian reintegration into global markets would also hurt his donors in the US oil industry and destabilize key allies in the Middle East. This is where Trump's dilemma becomes clear. He needs Iran to be weak, predictable, and controllable, but not truly free and not fully collapsed. Inside Iran, the situation is already catastrophic. What began as protests over economic collapse has turned into one of the bloodiest crackdowns in the country's modern history. Thousands have reportedly been killed within days. Doctors speak of an epidemic of blindness caused by deliberate shotgun fire aimed at protesters' faces. Bodies disappear into mass graves, and families are forced to pay exorbitant sums to retrieve their dead. Yet despite this brutality, the US military posture does not suggest preparations for a full invasion. Instead, it reflects Trump's preferred strategy: maximum intimidation with minimal personal and political risk. We have seen this pattern before. Short, highly theatrical military strikes. Technically impressive, visually dramatic, and easy to present as overwhelming victories, regardless of their actual strategic effect. Operation Midnight Hammer against Iran's nuclear facilities followed exactly this script. Israel did most of the hard work, degrading Iranian air defenses, while the US delivered a single night of headline-friendly strikes. Trump declared victory, claimed the nuclear program was destroyed, and moved on. Strategically, the regime survived. Politically, Trump won a media moment. This approach is not accidental. To understand Trump's foreign policy, one must understand his true formative experience: reality television. The Apprentice was not just a TV show, it was the blueprint for his worldview. Politics, war, diplomacy. For Trump, these are not moral or strategic endeavors, but episodes in a long-running show designed to maximize attention, humiliation, and the appearance of dominance. Public shaming, theatrical cruelty, and dramatic firings were not flaws of that format. They were its core features. And Trump continues to apply this logic on the global stage. Iran, however, does not fit neatly into this script. Trump publicly encouraged Iranians to rise up, implicitly tying his own success to the outcome of their protests. That was a mistake. He set a success metric he cannot easily control. If the regime survives, as it likely would after limited strikes, Trump risks looking weak. If the regime collapses too fully, oil markets could crash, destabilizing allies and donors alike. This is why we are now seeing hesitation, mixed signals, and sudden downplaying of military action. Trump needs time to see whether a deal, a controlled escalation, or a staged victory can still be engineered. What is clear is this: America is not all-powerful. The redeployment of the Abraham Lincoln Carrier Group from the Pacific weakens US deterrence against China. Prolonged commitments in Iran or Venezuela stretch American forces thin and expose strategic vulnerabilities that Beijing is carefully watching. Trump's strategy of regime control rather than regime change may ultimately prove more costly than decisive action, locking the US into long-term instability while eroding credibility with allies and partners. For Europe, this moment is critical. Trump's volatility, his transactional worldview, and his willingness to sacrifice allies for spectacle have become structural features of US policy. But they also create opportunities. Europe does not need to panic at every provocation. It needs to stay calm, coordinated, and strategically self-confident. The world is entering a phase where power is no longer guaranteed by noise, threats, or television moments, but by resilience, economic leverage, and unity. Europe has far more of that power than it often realizes. The coming weeks will tell us whether Trump chooses escalation, delay, or another dramatic bluff. But one thing is certain: whatever happens in Iran will not stay in Iran. It will ripple through oil markets, global politics, and the balance of power. And it may well decide the fate of Trump's presidency itself. So tell me in the comments, will Trump strike Iran? Will he settle for a deal? Or will we see another last-minute retreat? And what should Europe do in response? If you found this analysis useful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. More deep dives are coming.